Excellencies, distinguished ministers and vice ministers, distinguished delegates, I call to order the 6th meeting of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. I invite the Commission to resume its consideration of sub-item 3B, review of relevant United Nations plans and programs of action pertaining to the situation of social groups, and I welcome you to the high-level panel discussion on the topic, the third review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. As delegations are aware, the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging was adopted as an outcome document at the Second World Assembly on Aging in 2002. The General Assembly mandated the Commission for Social Development with a follow-up and appraisal of the action plan implementation, and the Commission decided to review the International Action Plan every 5 years. In this regard, the United Nations Regional Commissions were tasked with organizing and facilitating the third review and appraisal process in 2017. This morning's high-level panel will summarize the conclusions of the regional review and identify prevalent and emerging issues and related policy options. The panel objectives include the following: identifying opportunities and challenges for the further implementation of the Madrid Plan of Action, exploring how laws and policies aimed at respecting the human rights of older persons can advance the Plan of Action implementation, including through the exchange of good practices and lessons learned, and exploring how member states and the Commission can create synergies between the action plan and the Sustainable Development Goals. Distinguished delegates, the panel is composed of 5 very distinguished speakers, each nominated to report on respective regional review outcomes, and I'm delighted to welcome them to this panel. We have on our panel His Excellency Hector Cardenas, Minister of Social Action of Paraguay, His Excellency José Antonio Vieira da Silva, Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security of Portugal, and the Chair of the Economic Commission for Europe Regional Review and Appraisal Conference. And to his right, we have the Honourable Shirin Shamin Chowdhury, Speaker of the Bangladesh Parliament, and at the end, His Excellency Lazarus Kampambwe, Permanent Representative of Zambia to the United Nations. And then to my left, 3 from my left, Dr. Abla Sibai, Chair of the Epidemiology and Population Health Department at the American University of Beirut, and the co-founding director of the Center for Studies on Aging in Lebanon. And I'm also pleased to welcome our moderator, Ms. Sylvia Beals, who is an independent, inclusive social development consultant and former head of strategic alliances at Help Age International. I should also say that she was involved in the process and provided input on behalf of civil society for the process establishing the action plan. I now turn the meeting over to Mrs. Beals, and I look forward to an interesting, productive, and interactive session. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished delegates. I am very delighted to be here and welcome you all to what I know is going to be an extremely informative and interesting and, let us hope, interactive discussion. We have 3 hours in which we will hear from our most distinguished panelists and then invite your comments and questions from the floor. Just to set the scene a little bit, you may remember that this is what the Madrid plan looks like. It was agreed in 2002 by consensus by all governments, and it was the first plan to examine issues of aging across the world in detail. And I want to just read you a few words of its foreword by the then Secretary General, Kofi Annan, which seemed to me pertinent as we embark on our review of its 15 years this morning. In the first place, Kofi Annan stated that the plan and its political declaration marked a turning point in how the world addresses the key challenge of building a society of all ages. We will recognize those words from the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda 2030 wording. And he also said, which I think is very important that we consider in the Commission for Social Development, that it's the first time that governments agreed to link questions of ageing to other frameworks for social and economic development and human rights. Most notably, those agreed at the United Nations conferences and summits of the past decade. Since 2002, we have had a number of other plans, most importantly, the Sustainable Development Goal Agreement in 2015. So I would ask you to think about that as we go through the discussions. And finally, he says that each and every one of us has a role to play in promoting solidarity between generations, in combating discrimination against older people, and in building a future of security, opportunity, and dignity for people of all ages. We are all aging, and we all wish to age in a decent world, one which takes account of us through the life course. And I know that as we go through the discussions this morning, our most distinguished panel will bring to light both the challenges and opportunities that we face together in making this vision a reality. So with that, I'd like to invite, please, our most distinguished panel to begin. And I would invite His Excellency Hector Cardenas of Paraguay to set us off. Thank you.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman, to all the distinguished representatives on the panel. It is a pleasure for me to be part of this panel, where we will focus on evaluating the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. First, I'd like to point out that Latin America and the Caribbean was the first region in the world to hold a meeting on the review of the MIPAA, the fourth intergovernmental meeting on aging and the rights of older persons. This fourth conference was celebrated by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, together with the government of Paraguay, in Asunción from the 27th to the 30th of June 2017. Its main goal was to evaluate compliance with the commitments made at the San Jose Charter on the rights of older persons in Latin America and the Caribbean, adopted in the context of the second cycle of review and evaluation of the International Plan of Action of Madrid on Aging. I'd like to highlight the fact that this meeting was preceded by a preparatory intergovernmental meeting of the states of the Caribbean, also organized by ECLAC. The fourth regional conference in Asunción included 350 people and took place during 3 days of work. Delegations knew the different activities carried out to ensure the protection of the rights of older persons. Achievements made in policies for older persons, as well as the existing challenges and the gaps in implementing the San Jose Charter. The debate allowed us to share experience and best practices in the countries of the region, whose population follows the same world trend, rapid aging. It is thought that the number of people will double, the number of older persons will double by the year 2020, and it will represent 30% of the population. However, this new demographic scenario is taking place in countries with different national levels of development and institutional capacity. Furthermore, many of them are in more vulnerable situations, like in the small island states of the Caribbean or the landlocked countries, which is the case of my country, Paraguay. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, there's a high percentage of jobs in the informal sector, social inequalities, a low institutional development, and social security, which is incomplete. In the last 5 years, however, there have been great progress, like the approval of specific laws for older persons, national plans, institutional strengthening of local governments relating to this subject, prevention, punishment of violence against older persons, access to justice, care for mental disabilities, including Alzheimer's, and care, long-term care. At the regional level, the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of Human Rights of Persons is of importance. This is the first legal specific instrument on a regional basis for human rights of older persons. And this is to promote, protect, and ensure recognition and full enjoyment in dignified condition and equality for all human rights and fundamental freedoms. To date, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, and Uruguay have ratified this agreement. At the regional conference, various other countries have stated that they are making progress in this respect. As to the participation of the organizations of civil society, I'd like to say that there was broad involvement at the conference. Civil society organized a par meeting, the regional meeting of civil societies Madrid +5, and this was held in Ubacarí, Paraguay, from the 24th to the 27th of June, where they prepared a declaration focused on the human rights of older persons. During the 4th regional conference, they had the opportunity to read this statement, stating their concerns, their expectations, and their proposals. Now, during the 4th regional conference, delegations adopted the Declaration of Asunción, building inclusive societies, aging with dignity and rights. Through this, the governments reaffirmed the commitment to promote, protect, and respect the human rights, the dignity, and fundamental freedom of all older persons, without discrimination of any type, and they stressed the importance of the San Jose Charter as a regional framework for the development of public policies on this subject. This supplements the work of other existing mechanisms at regional and international level, like the International Plan of Action of Madrid. In the declaration, they highlighted the following points in particular: an appeal to governments to include, on a cross-cutting basis, policies and development plans, the aging subject, and implement specific policies recognizing gender inequality and promoting empowerment and independence, the need to consider the situations and the interests of older persons in the implementation and the follow-up of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, eradication of discrimination because of age, abandonment and violence, the importance of strengthening the capacity of government bodies on the subject of aging, data collection's importance and the disaggregated statistics in the national context, the specific subject of older persons with regard to risk evaluation, preparation, prevention, and response in case of disasters and reconstruction. The development of policies and care programs, long-term care programs. Furthermore, a specific reference was made to preventive programs and care for Alzheimer patients and other dementia, expanding palliative care services. The Latin American and Caribbean states also reaffirmed the commitment to the work of the working group, open-ended working group on aging, and stressed the need to start preparing a multilateral specific legal instruments based on a broad approach which would be binding to promote and protect the rights of older persons. Furthermore, it welcomed the work of the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights of older persons. Furthermore, in the Asunción Declaration, the governments recognized the importance of the regional conference because it's there that they can initiate the systematic process of examination and review of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging and the situation of aging persons on a regional basis based on national reports and exchange of information, which would lead to the compliance of other regional and international commitments on this subject. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much for your very important statement, Minister. And I would like just to pull out a few points which I think will be helpful as we go forward. I mean, the point you have raised that the region of Latin America has its regional plan. This is very important because the Madrid plan laid the grounds for regional action based on the modalities and wishes of their their component governments. And it's very interesting that in Latin America there is a support for the legal instrument of the rights of older persons, and I thank you for bringing that up. I think it's also very important that you brought forward the point of cross-cutting aging into all policies. As we are all aging, policies to do with health, employment, housing, poverty, etc., all must include a reference to aging. And it's extremely relevant that you raised that. Thank you. That older people's issues in the Agenda 2030. The issue of data, which I think comes through very strongly in the Secretary General's report. If we don't have enough data, how do we know what we're doing? Evidence matters. And the inclusion of older people in crisis and disaster risk reduction, and long-term care and palliative. So thank you very much for your most helpful opener. And I will now turn to His Excellency José Antonio Vieira de Silva to give his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Chair, dear colleagues, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Under Secretary General for having invited me to participate in the high-level panel discussion on the outcomes of the review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, the so-called MIPA, and its regional implementation strategy. I also take this opportunity to welcome the report of the Secretary General on this issue. In September 2017, Portugal, together with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, organized the 4th Ministerial Conference on Aging for Europe under the theme A Sustainable Society for All Ages, Realizing the Potential of Living Longer, where ministers adopt the Lisbon Declaration. A significant number of participants from member states, European and international organizations, researchers, and representatives of the civil society attended the conference. Participants exchanged views on progress made, identified remaining gaps and challenges, and set priorities for MIPA's implementation for the next 5-year cycle, 17-22. Since 2012, active aging has been advanced as the central concept and operational approach of national and regional policies on aging. The Lisbon Declaration proceeds on this way forward, enriched by the experiences of the last 5 years with the following 3 main goals. First, recognizing the potential of older persons. Second, encouraging longer working lives and the ability to work. And finally, ensuring aging with dignity. With the Lisbon Declaration, UNEC region acknowledged the following significant progress during the last 5 years. Increasing attention of policymakers, social partners, the media and the general public regarding issues of population and individual aging, including the observance of older persons' dignity and access to fundamental human rights. The development or revision of comprehensive national strategies on aging to implement the concept of active aging. Measures to adapt national social protection systems to the consequences of demographic changes. Growing involvement of civil society, in particular organizations of older persons, in the development of policies. Wider use of innovative approaches in providing services related to education, employment, culture and leisure, rehabilitation, health and social care, including technological and organizational innovations. It is noted that the pace of progress differs across the region. Also, the implementation of the plan from 2012 to 2017 has yet taken place in the context of economic insecurity, with several countries facing pressures to cut on social spending. Although EEC countries are already recovering, the socio-demographic framework faces strong challenges. In fact, population is aging rapidly with low fertility rates in a context of increasing globalization and technological revolution. Economy changing every day, and new risks are emerging. There is a need for new responses. They must take into account a new way to approach aging. Indeed, it is vital to change our mindset regarding aging in order to dissipate stereotypes and attitudes, both in society and in companies or organizations. Aging population cannot be seen as a burden. On the contrary, we must see its potential for the economy and for a sustainable and inclusive society. This is still far from being fully taken into account. With the Lisbon Declaration, the region took the opportunity to emphasize that policies on aging and its implementation are to be seen as a shared responsibility of all major players. it also recognizes the need for inter-regional dialogue and for effective collaboration between all the stakeholders. Even with the different demographic situations, the UNEC countries agreed that aging is a common challenge, not only for the region, but for all of us. Ministers committed to realize the potential of living longer and to work towards achieving the following main priorities by 2022. First, empower individuals to realize their potential for physical, mental, and social well-being throughout their lives to participate and contribute to society. Second, realize the potential of longevity, promoting a positive image of aging and enabling older persons to participate in the labor market, civil society, and the community life for a longer time. Third, eradicate competitive disadvantage in the labor market with employment services tailored to older job seekers, provide incentives for employers to hire older persons, and promoting lifelong learning. Fourth, make thus early retirement less attractive and encourage older persons to postpone retirement. Fifth, combat all forms of discrimination and providing the services and financial security needed to ensure a good quality of life and dignity in older age. Sixth, arise dignity and recognize the contribution of older persons to family and society, and therefore to intergenerational equity and reciprocity as necessary for strengthening social cohesion. Seventh, better integrate and coordinate quality health and social care systems, enabling older persons to maintain their autonomy. Eighth, develop age-friendly community programs and better support informal and family caregivers. And finally, address challenges such as dementia, social isolation, and loneliness by understanding the needs and preferences of older persons. The challenges that lie before us are huge, and we need to pioneer our work. A close follow-up is needed under the regular work of a committee. Thus, in the Lisbon Declaration, the ministers also acknowledged the need to explore the possibility of a resource-neutral transformation of the working group on aging to a UNEC standing sectoral committee. Madrid Plan is able to respond to this challenge. It is therefore essential to strengthen its links with governmental and supranational actions with impact on the aging of population. Of course, all of those efforts must go hand in hand with the Sustainable Development Agenda and the MIPA commitments are sure in line with different goals of that agenda. More important, they count on the participation and contribution of older persons. In the previous report, the Secretary General noted that the post-2015 agenda could provide Member States and the United Nations system with an opportunity to anchor the issue of aging in the global development agenda. I have no doubt that the 2030 agenda and the MIPA support each other. I believe the fourth cycle, which we are now launching, could increase the opportunities for inclusion of older persons in the Sustainable Development Goals and thus ensuring that no one is left behind. Thank you.
I thank you very much, Minister, for your most important remarks. And I also want to especially thank you for your listing of the key points to be taken forward. The question of changing the mindset to ensure that older people are visible and that as we age, we are not left behind because we are not included, not thought about in the engines of growth which create jobs and innovation, that the dignity of all of us from cradle to the grave is at the forefront of policy making. And you made a very important list in Lisbon of how you might do that, which I think we can all take note of and think about sharing this good practice. In particular, the integration of health and social care. Most older people do not need care services until right at the end of their lives, but do face challenges with non-communicable disease and need support from the health services which need to adapt for aging. And so that's a most important point. As the other issue you raised very strongly is to anchor MIPA in the implementation of the Agenda 2030, which picks up the conclusion of the Secretary-General's report to strengthen further implementation of the Madrid plan as a modality of the inclusion of older persons in Agenda 2030, which seems the most sensible way forward given the strength of the plan and the relevance to the goals. So thank you again. I just want to also add that last night you spoke very cogently yesterday in the meeting organised by AARP with UNDP and UNDESA about the need for public discourse and the public good of ageing. Let us not forget that as we go forward. Thank you. I would like to now turn to the Honourable Shirin Sharman Chowdhury, Speaker of the Bangladesh Parliament, for her remarks. Thank you.
Distinguished Chairperson, respected panelists, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. It gives me immense pleasure to attend the high-level panel discussion this morning on the global review of the outcomes of the third review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging 2002. Thank you for giving me the unique opportunity to address the Commission for Social Development and present the perspective of the Asia-Pacific region on the review of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. I would also like to thank UNDESA and UNESCAP for inviting me to participate in this panel. In my remarks today, I would like to draw upon the outcome of the Asia-Pacific Intergovernmental Meeting on the third review and appraisal of MIPA, convened by UNESCAP in Bangkok from 12 to 14 September 2017, which Bangladesh had the privilege to chair. The Asia-Pacific is a dynamic region that over the past decades experienced strong economic growth, significant poverty reduction, improvement of human and social development indicators, among other aspects of development. Aging is an irreversible trend which has critical ramifications and impact on economic and social fabric of all nations and societies around the globe. Rapid population aging, an important mega trend for Asia and the Pacific region, is an outcome of development process owing to increased longevity coupled with reduced fertility, reduced child and maternal mortality. Many Asia-Pacific countries are becoming aged societies before they become rich because of the very rapid aging process. To turn this aging population into an opportunity, we have to develop and adopt forward-looking policies and strategies that would ensure that older persons are not left behind, rather empowered to play their due role in promoting sustainable development. My own country, Bangladesh, as it marches towards development path, is going to experience the phenomena of aging as well. In Bangladesh, the percentage of population 60 years or older is expected to triple from 7% in 2015 to 22% by 2050. While in many European countries the aging process took more than 100 years, in Japan it took only 25 years to move from an aging to an aged society. Bangladesh is expected to cover this process between 2029 and 2046. This shows a very important trend that the window of opportunity to harness the first demographic dividend is likely to close for many countries in coming days, while it has already closed for most countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia. The UN ESCAP report addressing the challenges of population aging in Asia and the Pacific, prepared as a part of the regional review, shows that policies about aging in countries of the Asia-Pacific region vary by the stage of the demographic transition in those countries. Countries more advanced in population aging, such as Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and the Republic of Korea, had already drafted such policies in the 1990s. Aging now figures more prominently on the policy agenda, including in low-income countries, in recognition of the rapid demographic transition. To date, most of the countries of the Asia-Pacific region have a national policy or action plan on aging, and about two-thirds of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region also have an overarching legislation on population aging or on older persons. Since the second regional review of MIPA, several countries adopted new policies or revised existing policies and action plans. Bangladesh, for example, adopted the National Policy on Older Persons in 2013. Myanmar adopted its National Action Plan on Aging in 2014, and Nepal adopted the National Senior Citizens Action Plan in 2017. This shows that low-income countries are also showing increased awareness in population aging. Distinguished delegates, countries in Asia-Pacific region noted their continued commitment to the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging as main international framework to address aging. At the ESCAP's MIPA meeting, country representatives outlined government efforts to adopt appropriate policies, strategies, action plans, and laws to guide action to address aging issues, including combating abuse against older persons, addressing long-term care and employment, and creating enabling environments. Countries also shared how they created structures and networks to ensure coordination between the various ministries of the government, both at the local and national level, and also with civil society and private sector in implementing policies on aging and ensuring their coherence with overall policy directions. Country representatives also highlighted that the MIPA and its regular review had influenced these policies and action plans. The importance of international and regional cooperation and sharing of best practices, experiences, and mutual learning were also emphasized. Many countries, especially those that are more advanced in aging, implemented policies that provide employment opportunities for older persons who want to work. Governments have taken positive steps to promote decent work and income-generating opportunities for older persons through measures such as training, labor market information, and job search support or tax incentives for companies that employ older persons. Providing or improving income security for older persons was at the center of discussion and recommendation to reduce old age poverty and inequalities. Countries increase coverage of and access to contributory and non-contributory pension schemes and have taken steps to ensure the sustainability of existing pension systems. Some countries provide universal social pensions, but mostly with low pension values. Bangladesh is providing a means-tested old age allowance to more than 3.5 million older people. we are redoubling efforts to increase coverage and the benefit level for older persons every year under the social safety net protection. The need to provide employment opportunities to older persons who were fit and wanted to work was also noted as an essential component. While noting the importance of universal health coverage for all, many countries implemented policies to increase access to health care for older persons. Often, healthcare services are provided free of charge to older persons. Others expanded access to health insurance. Some countries, especially those with larger population of older persons, are also taking measures to improve the sustainability of healthcare systems to cope with the increasing pace of population aging and related increase in healthcare costs. Bangladesh is establishing special hospitals and clinics for older persons, besides having reserved beds for them in existing hospitals. Importance of providing care services and also extending support to caregivers were emphasized. Long-term care systems for older persons are being developed with public, private, and community providers, as well as with the families to provide integrated care for older persons. Specifically, some countries had taken steps to develop existing systems into systems of integrated care focusing on community care services. Countries also reported on efforts to support the creation of enabling environments to enable them to age in place and encouraging lifelong learning, addressing violence against them and abuse and neglect of older persons, mitigating social isolation and promoting positive images of aging, preventing ageism and age-related discrimination in the workplace. Measures are being adopted to make the built environment more accessible to them and persons and also to persons with disabilities. To ensure the human rights of older persons, several countries in the Asia-Pacific region, including Bangladesh, introduced a Parents' Maintenance Act, an important legislation which is intended to ensure that the younger generation provides support to their parents, reflecting intergenerational interdependence. Such laws are also strengthening filial piety, reflecting the very important component of intergenerational interdependence and which is inherent to most cultures in the Asia-Pacific region. Promoting adequate housing, safe and adaptable to changing requirements and capacities were also marked as essential component. Distinguished participants, the ESCAP review highlighted, despite improvements, there were still gaps in providing income security for older persons. Limited access to income security can raise concerns over rising poverty among them and rising income inequality in aging societies. The lack of income security is particularly a concern for them whose life expectancy is typically higher. Distinguished delegates, in tune with the 2030 agenda, providing access of older persons to new technologies should become a future priority. The ESCAP review also emphasized the importance of data on population aging and age disaggregated statistics as key elements in formulating evidence-based policies. Supporting monitoring and evaluation of program delivery to assure their efficacy and effectiveness was further stressed as a key priority. Nonetheless, the issue of aging should not only be seen from the welfare point of view, which is predominantly the case. The continued value of aged person in the society should also underpin the activities designed for them. The potential of effective contribution they can make to the society even after aging by virtue of their wisdom is worth exploring. We can think about having a normative discourse on how to tap into their wealth of experiences and subsequently come up with an institutional framework or system to put that into use for our own development endeavors. Dear participants, preparing for an aging population is vital to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda, with aging cutting across the SDGs on Poverty Eradication Goal 1, Good Health and Well-being Goal 3, Gender Equality Goal 5, Decent Work and Economic Growth Goal 8, Reduce Inequalities Goal 10, and Sustainable Cities Goal 11. Since the adoption of MIPA in 2002, the international community has increasingly paid attention to the situation of older persons. MIPA provides an important guiding framework for all countries to address aging society in the era of sustainable development. Let us all join hands and work together to ensure an inclusive, equitable, and sustainable world. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for this most helpful survey of what the issues are that you face in the region, but also your suggestions about how we take it forward, which we're coming together with quite a list, I think. It's very helpful. Just a few points to pick up to remind us that we are facing a mega trend of aging. We see it especially in Asia and the Pacific, but it is everywhere. And as you said, there is no time to waste. While policies might follow recognized trends, the trend of aging is now so fast, we have to get going with our policies to catch up. And while most countries do have national policy and legislation, some very recently, in some of the poorest countries of the region, which is a very helpful and good thing to see, and MIPA is the main framework, we do see challenges in terms of coordination and finance and policy coherence across the rest of government. Some things you picked up in particular include age disaggregated statistics, which we've heard before, but come through very much as a need to really push forward on in formulating evidence-based policies. You also picked up a most important point about tackling ageism, whether it be in health or the workplace, and also the importance of extending social protection. And finally, the point you raised about making sure we build on and capture the strength and wisdom of older people across the world as we age in the normative discourse, which is a most useful point I think we would like to remember. Thank you very much. I would like now to turn to His Excellency Lazarus Kapambwe, Permanent Representative of Zambia to the United Nations. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair of the Commission, the moderator of the panel, honorable members of the panel, distinguished guests. I'm honored to represent Africa on the panel on the global review of the outcomes of the third review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. I would want to thank the organizers for consistently organizing the event after each review, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for spearheading the third review on the continent, and the member states that responded. Out of our 54 member states, 32 contributed to the review, which is a relatively high response rate. Let me begin by providing the context of aging in Africa. While Africa is often described as a youthful continent, the age structure in the region is also changing dramatically as fertility and mortality have been declining. The percentage of population aged 60 and above is projected to rise from 4.9% in 2015 to 7.6% in 2050. In absolute terms, this equates to a more than tripling of the number of older people in Africa from 46 million in 2015 to 157 million in 2050. There are marked differences in trends towards aging in Africa. More than 15% of the populations of Mauritius and Reunion were aged 60 years or over in 2015, making them the most aged populations in Africa. In the Seychelles, 11% of the population was aged 60 years or over in 2015, and older persons comprised nearly 8% of South Africa's population. At the other end of the spectrum are countries such as Angola, Burkina Faso, the Gambia, and Uganda, where older persons accounted for less than 4% of the total population in 2015. Let me present some highlights from the third review, but allow me to say that generally, Africa has made some progress on the 3 priority areas of MIPA since the last review in 2012. Since the 2012 review, more African countries have formulated policies on aging. Overall, African countries that have national policies on older persons today are more than those which are yet to develop such frameworks. However, all the countries still face a wide range of challenges which continue to militate against the implementation of the policies. Many countries report major human rights challenges experienced by older persons, and key among these are lack of awareness of older persons' human rights, age discrimination and marginalization, gaps in social security provisions, as well as violations, abuse, neglect, and lack of legal protection. Most governments also report limited personnel dedicated to aging, limited support from international agencies, and limited budgetary resources for activities as key challenges that affect implementation of activities for older persons. Results from the survey show that data on various indicators disaggregated by age and sex are limited and available only in close to 1/3 of the countries that responded. Involvement in latter life research by government agencies, universities, and independent researchers is very low. Overall, few countries have data pertaining to social, economic, demographic, and health characteristics of older persons. Only 1/3 of the countries have a repository where data and evidence on population aging dynamics can be easily accessed by the concerned stakeholders. This could be a potential risk factor in limiting in-depth understanding and robust analysis of older persons' issues. Many African countries report that their local governments formally involve older people in the development and monitoring of national policies on aging at local levels and other levels. However, the majority of the countries do not have programs that provide opportunities for continued education among the elderly. In fact, almost all countries report the absence of programs that promote the use of communication technology among older persons. Similarly, older persons' inclusiveness in other areas such as non-contributory pension and emergency preparedness is strikingly limited. This is confirmed by the data from Help Age that shows that fewer than 1 in 5 older persons in Africa receives an old age pension. The results show that many African countries have measures to advance health and well-being of older persons into old age. The results show that not many African countries have measures to advance health and well-being of older persons into old age. Although the majority of the governments have policies and programs to promote health and well-being, implementation and sustainability of relevant measures is a big challenge. The majority of countries do not have policies and programs to ensure universal and equal access to health care for older persons. There are also limited educational opportunities for training healthcare providers, health professionals, and informal caregivers in managing older persons. Many African governments do not have measures to support older persons with disabilities. In the context of ensuring enabling and supportive environments, only a small number of countries have put in place programs that provide aging in the home environment, mobility outside home environment, as well as care for the elderly. Similarly, there are limited measures for mitigating neglect, abuse, and violence against older persons and encouragement of images of the older persons. I wish to take this opportunity to mention that the impact of MIPA implementation on the fulfillment of the right of older persons to adequate standards of living in my own country, Zambia, has been such that all social protection programs are now tailored to include the needs and aspirations of older persons. The specific social protection programs that target vulnerable and potentially destitute older persons include the social cash transfer, food security packs, and farmer input support program, among others, which all aim at improving the welfare of all vulnerable groups, including the older persons. It is also worth mentioning that government recently revised the retirement age from 55 years to 65 years to allow more of the aging population to take part in the economic affairs of the country. In addition, the government of Zambia, through the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services, has developed a national policy on aging in order to address the many challenges faced by older persons. The ministry has also established old people's homes to provide care and support to older persons aged 60 and above. Let me conclude by indicating that although progress has been made since 2012, African countries need to do more to address the challenges which militate against implementation of national plans and policies. There is need to address key reported barriers to implementation, namely insufficient financial resources, insufficient political will, insufficient cooperation between ministries, insufficient population aging information, and insufficient human resources capacity. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for what I think was a very honest review from your region. I think it's important to point to the challenges which you brought together very well. For example, your listing of the issues of insufficient finance, political will, insufficient cooperation between the ministries, insufficient population aging information and data, and insufficient human resources capacity. It's really important that you have shared that with us, because these are issues that can be worked on with the political will which you brought out. I also thank you for speaking to us about the good practice which your own government is putting in place to tackle the poverty and economic exclusion of older persons through your putting in place the social protection programs and targeted support for older farmers, amongst others, and the recognition that retirement at 55 is not necessarily the best thing if you might live to 70 or 80 and above. And also, I want to thank you for pulling out so clearly the importance of data, because it's come out before in the other speakers and in the report. But as you said, if we don't have the data, and it's very hard for policies to properly to properly focus on what is needed to include the older person. So thank you very much, and I'm sure this will be food for thought for delegates as they comment back. So I'm now going to turn to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Abla Sibai, who is of the American University of Beirut and co-founding director of the Center for Studies of Aging in Lebanon. Dr. Abla is a person with whom I personally have collaborated over the years, including with a visit to look at issues of aging in Dubai. And I call on her to give her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable panel members, distinguished delegates and guests, I'm really very pleased to participate in this high-level panel discussion on the third appraisal of MIPA and present findings from the ESQUA region, a region that comprises of 18 countries in West Asia and North Africa and 340 million population. First, a brief overview of demographic transition. Next, please. As the pace of population aging in the region quickens, the majority of ESQUA countries are on the cusp of impressive demographic changes with far-reaching social and economic implications. While the number of people aged 60 years and over has more than doubled in the past 30 years, this is anticipated to almost quadruple in the next 30 years, reaching close to 85 million older persons by 2050, which would then represent 15% of the population. Tunisia, Lebanon, and Morocco include the highest proportion of older persons in the region. Next. By 2050, the number of older persons is expected to exceed the number of children in 10 out of the 18 member states. As elsewhere, this demographic transition comes with many challenges, including a decline in extended family structures and a rise in the burden of chronic degenerative diseases. However, the region is additionally challenged by protracted wars, conflicts, and political instabilities, including the Syrian crisis, now in its 8th year, resulting in several waves of youth outmigration, seeking better opportunities elsewhere, and leaving behind older refugees to fend for themselves or for orphanage children. Next. Institutional response on aging in ESQUA countries have mostly been inspired and encouraged by the UN resolution of the year 1999 as the International Year of Older Persons, as well as by MIPA in 2002, with governments creating various modalities of arrangements. Policies tend to be focused around the mandate of the ministry where the Department of Aging or the National Commission is housed, mainly health, social, or family affairs. National commissions in general include delegates from other ministries, municipalities, the civil society, and NGOs, but these often lack representations from the Ministry of Housing and Environment, from the trade unions, from the media, as well as academia. In spite of variations across the region, The current generation of older adults in ESCWA countries share baseline vulnerabilities that have important implications for their care. These include low levels of educational attainment, particularly for women, with illiteracy rates can reach up to 80% in certain localities in Yemen. Dwindling economic safety nets and continued workforce participation into the latter years of life due to insufficient or inadequate social protection. Pension schemes vary, but are mostly characterized by inequity in coverage across sectors of employment and by gender. In contrast to the civil servants and those in the public sector, the self-employed and those in the informal sector are less likely to qualify for old age pension plans, thus adversely affecting women who fall sharply out of the social security umbrella. As a result, participation in the labor force beyond retirement age is a common phenomenon in the region and may reach up to 60% in poorer countries such as Sudan. Here, retirement is not an option. Work is a necessity to survive. When it comes to health and well-being in old age, data about the older people are scarce in the region. This is a big gap which needs to be filled. ESCWA countries that are early in their epidemiological transition continue to experience the double burden of disease with high rates of both communicable and non-communicable diseases. Of particular concern in the region are the exceptionally high and alarming levels of obesity and diabetes affecting mostly women in certain countries of the Gulf region and exceeding those in the West. Healthcare delivery is largely built around cure rather than prevention and around acute, episodic models of care that are ill-equipped to meet the requirements of those with chronic and multiple comorbidities. Only a few countries in the region, such as Lebanon, Egypt, and Tunisia, recognize geriatrics as a specialty on its own. And with the exception of Tunisia, there are major gaps in the supply of geriatrics and gerontologists across the region. In ESCWA countries, the family remains the main pillar of aging policies, with legislations being founded on the vital role of informal and unpaid family care. Yet, demographic realities, socioeconomic advances, and political conflicts across the region have triggered neglect and various forms of alienation from the traditional multi-generational family configuration, resulting in increasing solitary living among older persons, which can reach up to 20%, as in the case of southern Lebanon. Maltreatment is often cloaked by family secrecy. Hence, the topic is vastly under-researched, and figures, when present, are likely to be underestimates. Furthermore, and despite growing conflicts in the region, there is a distinct lack of consideration for the specific needs of older persons in emergencies. A recent report revealed that less than 5% of the humanitarian assistance project explicitly address older persons as a vulnerable group. 15 years since PIPA, ESCWA countries have taken considerable steps in policy development on aging, yet these steps have been hampered by gaps between the presence of policies on one hand and the reach and scope of implementation on the other. Challenges include deficiency of financial and human resources, weak ministerial coordination, and lack of disaggregated data for evidence-based making. And here these are shared by colleagues from Africa as well. Population aging has far-reaching economic and social implications for the region as a whole. This requires a regional or sub-regional response while working within country-specific context. Coordination and collaboration and cross-country initiatives for knowledge production, exchange and sharing of experiences, and best practices may save limited resources. Distinguished participants, the aging agenda needs to advocate for, firstly, an attitudinal shift on aging that would overcome marginalization, invisibility, and exclusion and realize the potential of living longer. And secondly, a paradigm shift where the older people are placed at the center of development and where the potentiality for advancing the aging agenda is no longer conditioned on achieving economic growth, but rather becomes at the heart of good developmental processes. Finally, progress on the implementation of MIPA's goals, including poverty eradication, good health, safe and sustainable environments, fits hand in glove within the wider efforts to meet the 2030 agenda of the SDGs. This represents a renewed opportunity to ensure that the future holds healthy, secure, and empowered aging societies for all, with no one left behind. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Abler, for your most informative and clear review of what is going on in your region and what needs to happen. A few things I pulled out just to keep in mind. You raised the issue of older women. I think also the distinguished excellency from Africa also raised it. Women are the most long-lived across the world, and many older women face a miserable and undignified old age, which can't be what we all want to see happen. I think you also made a very important statement, which is that older women are, the issues of maltreatment are cloaked in family secrecy. This is a most telling phrase, and one that should make us all think very hard about how and what we are doing to support all of us as we age. You also spoke of the non-communicable disease burden, which affects, although non-communicable diseases affect all ages, 75% of its impact is felt in the over age group, according to the World Health Organization. And chronic and multiple comorbidities need to be dealt with in an integrated and age-inclusive health system. The issue of coordination you raised as well, and that of placing older people at the center of development. So I think before I open the floor, I'd just like to make a few remarks about what I think I have heard. I hope it reflects what you have too. We have a number of issues with which we're dealing. One is that data is not there yet for countries and regions, especially in Africa and the region of Esquire, to deal with aging properly. And it's a clear priority of the Madrid Plan and the Agenda 2030. A second issue, which I would call a communication on best practice. Even with the absence of data, there is progress, but perhaps the progress isn't properly shared. And should we have more effort to communicate good models, would this be helpful? Thirdly, we've talked about crisis and humanitarian, and it comes in the Secretary-General's report. Despite our knowledge of crisis and humanitarian need, we've also heard, as Dr. Abler has said, less than 5% of humanitarian responses specifically target older persons, despite international frameworks which urge governments and agencies to include. So how can we cope with that? What should we do? Mainstreaming aging. Is it important to mainstream across all policy dimensions and have specific programs? And I think we've heard that the importance here is to communicate across and to coordinate between ministries. The importance of citizen dialogue. The Madrid Plan had, as part of its mainstreaming, as part of its review process, something called the bottom-up review and appraisal process, where all governments were requested and agreed to do this, to bring older people and their associations into the monitoring process. Is it something that is happening? Could this happen more? We've heard how helpful it is when it does happen. And finally, this important issue of synergy between the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging and its recommendations and the overarching framework for Sustainable Development Goals. It's a key recommendation in the report of the Secretary-General, which suggests MIPA as a modality. Is this happening? When you come back with your comments, distinguished delegates, you might reflect on this and give some guidance as to how this might be strengthened. Thank you very much. And now I open the floor. Okay, I call on the distinguished delegate, Executive Secretary of the National Council for Social Policies of the Government of Argentina.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and I thank the panelists for their interesting presentations. Argentina associates itself fully with the Declaration of Asunción, adopted as the 4th Regional Intergovernmental Conference on Aging and Rights of Older Persons in Latin America and Caribbean, held in Asunción, Paraguay in June, in the framework of the 3rd review of evaluation of the Madrid Plan of Action headed by CEPAL. We reaffirm our commitment to promote, protect, and respect human rights, dignity, and the fundamental freedoms of older persons without discrimination of any type, and highlights the important and diverse contributions which older persons can give to the functioning and the development of societies, recognizing that there are still difficulties and specific obstacles in the regional context which undermine the participation of older persons in political, social, economic, and cultural life. In different forums, it has been demonstrated that while the implementation of the plan of action can be positive for the enjoyment of certain human rights of older persons, the plan is not in itself an instrument for human rights. And it deals with issues relating with aging, mainly from the perspective of development. The plan of action was not designed to approach comprehensively the existing gaps in the protection regime at international level, and therefore it is not sufficient to guarantee the full enjoyment of all human rights of older persons. In that respect, it is imperative to continue the discussions aimed at the development of an international binding instrument which provides comprehensive protection of the rights of and well-being of older persons. At national level, in the Republic of Argentina, we continue to make progress in recognizing and granting rights to older persons. Not only are policies implemented over the last years for care for older persons, but also in the normative framework in compliance with the plan of actions in 3 priority areas. In May, the National Congress adopted the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of Human Rights of Older Persons, which is now fully established in our country, and it has higher ranking than our national laws. The 3 important achievements for the rights of older persons during the last 5 years were universalization of Social Security coverage, which now reaches 97% of older persons, because almost all of the older persons in Argentina have pensions, or whether they are contributive or non-contributive for old age, and it provides medical coverage. The strengthening of public institutionalization for aging in the country. We have created institutions at provincial and municipal level and different programs to respond to the needs of older persons and to promote their autonomy and participation. Currently, 92% of the provincial public institutions and local governments have their own organizations focused on older persons. The expansion and training of specialized human resources who are specialized in gerontology and home care. We have trained more than 45,000 persons dealing with care for old age. And we have training courses in geriatrics and gerontology throughout the country with a view to having human resources who are trained to deal with care needs of this population. Finally, the Argentine government has provided the design of public policies and in decision-making in line with what was established in the Madrid program. In the Federal Plan for Older Persons, which is the center for the implementation of all policies for older persons, there are different guidelines which include programs which are based on the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, the promotion and for the community for rights of older persons, and community awareness raising, the need to provide recreation and physical activities and kind treatment for older persons. In summary, the universality of public policies aimed at searching well-being and health for old age are our government's commitment. In this respect, the challenges are to continue to ensuring closeness and assistance for the population in a comprehensive way, promoting an aging process which are providing them with healthy and inclusive. The Argentina has analyzed the life cycle in keeping with the SDG, and this is a cycle which is a priority to focus on. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate very much for her comments, and we have quite a number of delegates wishing to make a contribution, so I will just go on to the next speaker and come back to the panel after some interventions for their comments. Thank you very much. I'd like to call next on the distinguished Minister for Development of Guatemala.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. This Commission reflects the commitment and leadership of our countries to participate actively in seeking solutions to the major problems which affect our people, like reducing inequality and concrete responses for the needs to achieve a dignified life with social inclusion of all citizens, which will lead to peaceful, democratic, and inclusive societies who respect human rights. Madam Moderator, Guatemala is aware of the living conditions of older persons. They're difficult, if not impossible, because old people do not have the mechanisms which will give them their own income. They don't have the conditions to have dignified lives, and neither do they have pensions in many cases, nor do they have company. In this respect, there are components of violence which they are victims of. And after closing this productive cycle of life, they're burdened. And this dependency becomes conditions of vulnerability, and they're often victims of violence. Therefore, we have to work at national level as well as internationally to strengthen our institutions and our capacity to ensure fundamental freedoms and the quality of life for old persons. And I'd like to highlight the following. It is here where the representatives of member states have to work in a coordinated way together and recognize a specific instrument which will deal with the problems which afflict old persons. Many people of 60 and older will double by 2015 and 2050 to 900,000 million. And therefore, if we wish to leave no one behind, as stated in the Agenda 2030, we have to deal with this in our working agenda, because discrimination for age is unacceptable. I thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate. I note your call for the inclusion of older people in the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you. I now move to call on the Deputy Minister for Social Rehabilitation of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Indonesia continues to ensure that older persons shall not be subject to any form of discrimination and further improve their equality and equal opportunities as mandated by the Constitution and various laws and regulations. So, in this regard, Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, or MIPA, has provided fundamental basis on the protection and promotion of the rights of older persons for Indonesia. At the national level, the implementation of MIPA in Indonesia is translated through several affirmative actions, such as ensuring and enabling a supportive environment for older persons, eradicate poverty among older persons, empower older persons by providing employment opportunities, improve living conditions and infrastructure in rural areas, and promote participation of older persons in decision-making processes at all levels. As the number of elderly people continues to increase in Indonesia, it is imperative to us to address some of the gaps in protecting the rights of older persons. Indonesia has adopted Law number 13 of 1998 on welfare of older persons, which focus on increasing social welfare of older persons, especially those who live in poverty. The government of Indonesia is currently working to revise the law to ensure that normative framework on older persons is in line with national human rights commitment and priorities, and is adequate to respond to the growing trends at national and global level. The revision processes will focus on shifting the paradigm from charity-based to right-based approach and on promoting empowerment of older persons to fully participate as active and productive members of society and development. This spirit is in line with MIPA's first priority, that older persons can fully participate and gain benefits from the development. Our president has also enacted Presidential Decree number 52 of 2004, which mandated the establishment of National Commission on Older Persons. As an independent body, the Commission is mandated to work together with the government to further improve the well-being of older persons in Indonesia. The Commission also established at provincial and local level to address various challenges at the grassroots level. Finally, Indonesia remains committed to implementing social services and rehabilitation for the elderly by establishing a national priority program with the elderly as the main target in 2018. Provision of social rehabilitation for older persons and establishment of home care services for the elderly have become two main activities of this program. The government also continues to provide social support and assistance for the elderly living in poverty, social rehabilitation activity through support for potential elderly people to improve their productivity, and provide accessible services and facilities, particularly public infrastructure for the elderly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Delegate. I hear again from you the insistence on the promotion of the rights of older persons and rights-based approaches. Thank you. I now call on the National Secretary for the Promotion and Defence of the Rights of Older Persons from Brazil. Thank you very much.
Senhoras,
Chairperson and distinguished delegations, panelists, according to estimates by the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, in 2017, Brazil had a population of 208 million people, 14.8% of which are over 60 years. This corresponds to 32 million older persons. These data show a rapid increase in the elderly population in a country that has profound regional disparities in terms of social and economic development. Aware of this process of demographic transition, our country has enhanced debates about the rights of older persons in light of a broader human rights perspective. Thus, in August 2017, we created the National Secretariat for the Promotion and Defense of the Rights of Older Persons within the structure of the Ministry of Human Rights. Its mission has been updated, and it promotes a healthy aging and the protection of older persons in situations of vulnerability. The policy has a network structure bringing together different parts of the government and using the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging as a reference for its actions. Besides the National Plan of Adult Care for people in situation of long-stay dependence is under discussion, envisaging to attend as well to the elder population as persons with disabilities. I wish to highlight the governance model adopted by the Brazilian government, which provides for the participation of councils with balanced representation of government officials and civil society members in the monitoring of public policies. The role of articulation and monitoring played by the National Council on the Rights of Older Persons is a model of social supervision and was endorsed by the United Nations Regional Programme for the third round of the monitoring of the Madrid Plan of Action, and it is aligned with the provisions of the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons, since it emphasizes the importance of civil society engagement. During the last 15 years, Brazil has innovated with social protection associated with poverty reduction by including 13.8 million families in cash transfer programs as the renounced Bolsa Familia, which aroused the interest of many countries. And the continuous cash benefit program is aimed to ensure the right to life with dignity. This program was designed for people over 65 years who provide for families who are unable to provide for them. The benefit amounts to a monthly minimum wage, which is equivalent to around $300. Concerning legislation and public policies for elderly people, Brazil has had a regulatory framework since 1994. The national policy of older persons, which is currently being reviewed in light of the demographic transition. In 2003, this was approved, the Statute of the Elderly, and in 2017 we have launched a care plan for an active aging directed to foster personal autonomy and social protagonism. 2018 will be the National Year of Valorization and Promotion of the Human Rights of the Elderly, celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In spite of the progress achieved, we recognize that we still have a long way to go on behalf of the rights of older persons, as related to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, so as to leave no one behind. This ensures social inclusion, and we will leave nobody behind. Thank you.
I thank you, distinguished delegate from Brazil, and also for sharing your most interesting plan, Right to Life with Dignity, and the cash transfer, which equates to a monthly minimum wage. Thank you very much. I now turn to the Honourable Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Development of the Russian Federation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, participants. The Russian Federation on supporting aging and older people has seen this to become a very timely topic. For a long time in the Russian Federation, we saw a trend of very low lifespan, but the measures taken in the 2000s, in the past 5 years as well, have seen an increase in the lifespan from 67 to 72, and also an increase in the number of citizens of retirement age, so that about a third of the population will be retirement age in another 10 or 15 years. So the situation of older persons is an inalienable part of the social policy of my country. Here, I would like to support what was said to the effect that only through a pension system we cannot solve the problems of older peoples, because this is, of course, is a burden on those who are of working age and reduces their possibilities. The Russian pension system, like many other pension systems, also has provided more stimulation for a later pensionable age, retirement. So this is a complex program which has a targeted character for those who are older. And so 2016, we adopted a strategy in the interests of those who are older to 2025, and also a plan to have the first stage of the strategy included. In this strategy, we have the formation of conditions for potential and knowledge of those who are older in work and giving the necessary assistance to these people. We also have a strategy which is to improve the quality of life of older people, depending on their individual capacities and their requirements. I think many would agree that the requirements of people who are a bit over 60 and who are more active is different from the requirements of those who are 40 or 80 or older. And so this strategy is a differentiated approach which is more inclusive and gives necessary assistance for those who are older. In working out these strategies, we take into account the overall Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on International Cultural and Political Rights, and also the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging of 2002. Now, of course, key aspects of the strategy are ensuring equal access to healthcare, social protection, culture, sports, and other areas. But also important in the strategy are steps to help older people to continue with their work, even if they've reached retirement age. And the activities of older people in new and former workplaces will help them to increase their skills and adapt them if they're a part of the older generation. This will enable them to create conditions which are for professional training and in order to obtain employment. Now, regarding older people and improving employment, we have an area which I would like to point out, which is a key one in our strategy, which is stimulating and helping to increase the aspect of training and education for older people. For a number of years now, we've had regional and federal contests among people who are older on computer courses, for example. And I would like to say in conclusion that Russia will further take steps in legislative acts in order to help older people, and also will adopt measures which will effectively help and have a positive effect on the lives of older people. Thank you.
I thank you very much, distinguished delegate, for sharing the detail of your work. This is in the realm of coordination and communication about what we are doing, good practice. Thank you very much. I now call on the distinguished delegate of Costa Rica, President of the Board, the National Council of the Elderly. Thank you.
Estimadas. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be here today participating in this forum. The life expectancy in the world's increase is one of the greatest achievements of humanity. And from the political declaration of MIPA was the international platform which guides and shows the way for actions of states to increase opportunities for older persons by promoting other additional instruments. Costa Rica knows its duties and has met the challenge of directly tackling the commitment to leave nobody behind, the main premise for Agenda 2030. It is therefore working on the challenge for aging in other areas for older persons' rights, among which the San Jose Charter, the Inter-American Convention for the Protection of Human Rights of Older Persons, and the Paraguay Declaration. Abandonment and falling palliative care, discrimination against older persons, alternative medicine, diseases including dementia and Alzheimer are tackled by my country, respecting the Inter-American Convention to guarantee the human development for everyone. I'll cite a few examples. Strengthening home care networks, which deals with 18,000 persons in their homes, in addition to those who are institutionalized. A national policy for care for people who have been abandoned or street people. The law 93/94 for personal autonomy, which ensures insurance for personal care. They provide care workers, and they also allow people who have been interned to return home. Dementia is not stigmatized, and they can return to their homes. A national plan for Alzheimer's and other related dementia, and providing care workers. The role of the state recognizing the rights of older persons has to be constant, proactive, effective, and taking into account their emotions. They must have rights with the best possible quality of life, including the participation of society. The preparation of an international human rights, which is binding, must continue in spite of the efforts made by the government and the competent bodies of the United Nations and civil society. It has been a slow process to meet the needs of older persons and their recognitions as fully fledged persons with rights. We have to ensure that we contribute to the building of social development, and we have to make greater efforts to achieve an international convention, which, like with women and disabled children, we take care of older persons and their inalienable rights. Nobody should be left behind means that we have to work intensively so that no older person is hungry or cold. We have to have an international convention which will give us a privileged position for older persons. Thank you.
Many thanks, distinguished delegate. And from that, I note an important point you made about the national plan for dementia. Thank you. And the call that no one can be left behind with hunger and cold in this modern day. So thank you for your contribution. I now call on the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you very much, moderator. Is it on? Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, moderator. We have some input as South Africa on the topic. First of all, we would like to thank you very much for the panel that had made a valuable contribution to this topic. We would like to indicate as South Africa that we strongly believe that there are opportunities that can assist our counterparts and the rest of us in terms of ensuring that we leave no one behind and the review, towards the review of the Madrid International Plan of Action. Okay. In South Africa, we have 4.5 million of the population who are older persons, which equates to 8% of all the citizens. And then there are several factors that have led to the increase of the population of the people over the age of 60. For example, the increase of the life expectancy at birth, reduction on maternal and child mortality, as well as the improvement of the standard of living, nutrition, and the access to nutrition and health. And we see the opportunities for the implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action as South Africa based on the following. For example, the constitution of the country. It does contribute to the rights of the older persons. And then the South African policy for older persons, we do have an act which was promulgated in 2006, the Older Persons Act, that justify the need for all of us to implement. And also the issue of the equalization of the age, that led to the universalization of the old age grant. Over and above that, there is social protection for the older persons through the cash transfers. For example, if you're an older person, you qualify for the old age grant, and also there is a grant in aid for those older persons that are older that cannot take care of themselves, so that whoever takes care of them also receive that support in terms of the grant in aid, and the War Veterans Grant, contributory pension schemes, as well as the social relief of distress. I must indicate that this legislation is also supported by the fact that we have department committees. There are authorities that look into the fact that we do comply with the Older Persons Act, which is also in line with this Madrid declaration. The Department of Social Development serves as a custodian of the policies pertaining to aging. The South African Older Persons Forum, which was formed, which is a representative of different older persons across the country. We also have the South African Human Rights Commission, which also looks into the interest and the protection of the rights of older persons. And there is a Social Security Agency, which is an entity responsible for cash transfers of grants to the older persons. We also have the Intergovernmental Coordinating Committee on Aging. These are the 4 distinct bodies and entities that oversee the specific needs of different specific aspects on the different policies targeting the aging in the country. There are other intervention strategies dealing with the population aging in South Africa. For example, the implementation of the Older Persons Act. This strategy also serves to implement various aims and goals of the MIPA of 2002, while emphasizing the mainstreaming of issues pertaining to policy implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So the Department of Social Development in the country serves as the custodian of the policies targeting the aging in South Africa. There are other also intervention strategies which looks into the issue of the Older Persons Forum that provides elderly population with a voice in Parliament, various economic empowerment programs to combat poverty, amongst the elderly population, as well as national awareness campaigns focused on healthcare and the abuse of the elderly persons. Lastly, Chairperson, I must indicate that we see that there is an opportunity for us to also accelerate the good practices that we observe as the country. For example, the formation of collaborations and share experiences in terms of research and programs and policy on aging, as well as the promotion of positive image of aging. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate very much for her very clear, if you like, listing of how you are managing the transition in South Africa and your programs, and for the ideas you have presented to bring good practice and visibility of aging to others. Thank you. I now call on the distinguished representative of France.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning to you all. Thank you, Madam Moderator. We agree with the terms of the initial statement made by the European Union and fully agree with the conclusions and recommendations of the report of the Secretary General on the third cycle of the Madrid Plan of Action. France, in fact, attaches great importance to the well-being of elder people and is something which would promote the rights of people in both multilateral systems and in the United Nations system. We have in this regard seen successes in the International Plan of Action on Aging and also the new stakes and objectives of the fourth Plan of Action for 2018-2022, whereby the members of the Economic Commission for Europe of the United Nations have committed themselves during the Lisbon Conference in September 2017. France, on this occasion, expressed its dedication to the Madrid Plan, and our authorities have given increased attention to the problems of older people and have committed themselves in an increased manner to ensure their rights and respect for their dignity. Within the framework of the plan, initiatives of all types have been taken in many European states in order to adapt national systems of social protection to the consequences of aging of the population. Innovative approaches have been developed from a technical point of view as well as organizational, with, for example, the development of public partnerships and private partnerships to provide services to people who are older. Nevertheless, the third cycle has shown that there's a great deal left to be done so that the norms in vigor and the existing rules and regulations nationally, regionally, and internationally might be fully carried out, and so that the existing machinery might be better known and more used. In spite of the ambition and the relevance of the themes of the plan, one could also regret that the regional and national plan still are lacking the means for implementation and sometimes better governance. Good ideas and proper practices are numerous, but very often they are juxtaposed in a static way rather than interacting in a dynamic of action. The initiatives taken more often are oriented towards the development of tools or norms, sometimes on paper, but without being organized as for their real practical implementation in the field. In spite of encouraging progress, we are then far from the goal and status of older people in the world, which still remains a matter of concern in many aspects. Concrete acts, immediate ones, are necessary in order to deal with in the field, along with social workers and healthcare workers, family aides, and families and associations of NGOs, and the organizations of the older people themselves, with the lack of information, implementation, follow-up, and evaluation. There have been several areas already referred to promote the rights of older people, and may I recall just a few of them, which for France appear to be the more relevant. Focusing on the full and complete implementation of existing norms. Give pride of place to a pragmatic approach, immediately useful, consistent with the commitments entered into by the states parties of the Madrid Plan. involve the implementation of norms with effective follow-up based on solid indicators, have a better use of procedures, a multilateral review, such as the periodic universal review, or greater attention to be given to the situation of the rights of older people, develop an inclusive approach, which will allow for a better awareness of states, multilateral bodies, and of civil society of the specific situation of older people. Each and every time we have to deal with health care, social protection, protection against violence, poverty, and combating discrimination and exclusion. Taking into account systematically the status of older people in plans of action and strategies of the United Nations funds and organizations such as UN Women and the International Labour Organization. We welcome the organization of this high-level roundtable, which will deal with this question and also new ways and means of thinking of this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Delegate France, I take away from this the importance of action on the means of implementation of the Madrid Plan and the various suggestions you have raised, and your support for the conclusions of the Secretary-General's report, and including that of the formation of the Interagency Group on Age. Thank you. I would like to call next on the distinguished representative of Paraguay.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. At the outset, I should like to thank you for effective leadership of the panel, and also thank the panelists for their very interesting presentations. As Minister Tocarenos of Paraguay has said, at the 4th Regional Conference on Aging and the Rights of Older Persons, Latin American and Caribbean states adopted the Declaration of Asunción, and one of its distinctive elements was an approach of human rights. Insofar as aging is concerned, over the years, our region, the Latin American region, has evolved from a pure approach of well-being for older persons, taking into account the important contribution that older people can make to the functioning of society if they have the necessary guarantees. Rapid aging is a reality, even though in different nuances in the region. In my country, in Paraguay, the population is mainly young, about 70% are less than 20 years of age. But at national level, we have a population where we have an increasing number of percent, which at present is 10% of the population. This demographic situation requires us to focus on this population group, and we have to give visibility to it, and the government of Paraguay has taken the commitment, together with CEPAL, to organize the 4th conference. That is why we were involved in this. The Declaration of Asunción, together with the different subjects it covers, and in particular with the emphasis of human rights for older persons, as well as the San Jose Charter, will help develop public policies in Latin American countries and Caribbean countries, supplementing the already existing state. We states link our development plans to plans for human rights, and at the same time we generate follow-up mechanisms for these plans. We have established a matrix which relates the goals of our public policies, to the Agenda 2030 and to human rights. We also have a mechanism which is a platform to follow up the compliance of these goals, and we call it HIMORES because it means there is follow-up, and it includes two bodies for human rights, and we have full trust in these two bodies. I'd like to ask the panelists in their revolution, could they refer to the instruments which are being developed, not only in their respective countries, but in countries where they refer to these mechanisms and will link development plans to human rights, and how can we make the follow-up of their compliance more effective? I reiterate the commitment of my country, Paraguay, who was together with Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, and Uruguay, to encourage this subject and continue to monitor what has happened in this meeting. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Paraguay and note his question to the panelists for observations on instruments which can align development and human rights for effective implementation of commitments to older persons. I hope I've understood that correctly. We'll come back at the end to the panelists. We have a list here which we will go through, including from non-governmental speakers. So I beg your patience until we get to the point when the panelists can respond. Thank you. I now call on the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Thank you, moderator. Kenya is committed to the good ideas of the Madrid Plan of Action, and in this regard, we have prioritized aging in our national planning and are putting the necessary resources at their disposal. As we speak, we have just completed our third medium-term plan, 2018 to 2022, of our Kenya Vision 2030, where the issues of the aged are actually featuring very prominently. We have come up with the necessary legislative, policy, and institutional frameworks to ensure that older persons are able to participate properly or effectively towards the realization of Agenda 2030 and Africa Agenda 2063. Again, moderator, we have developed a comprehensive social protection program where the elderly above the age of 70 years of age are insured through the National Hospital Insurance Fund, NHIF, so that they can access medical care at the hour of their need. The NHIF package is also being expanded to cover a broader set of services, including emergency ambulance evacuations, heart surgeries, and chronic diseases. The National Safety Net Program, which is popularly known as Inua Jamii, ensures that the older persons are supported through cash transfers. To respond to the issue of data needs, registration of all these older persons is ongoing at the subnational level using biometric identification system to ensure that no one is left behind. And we are targeting about 1.6 million persons. We are also working out on a framework of coordination between national and subnational levels in order to reach more people. In our planning cycle, moderator 2018-2022, the government will further review and implement the national policy on older persons and aging that was developed in 2009 and reviewed again in 2014. And we want to do that so that we are better to respond to the needs of the aged. The overall goal of this policy is to provide an environment that recognizes, empowers, and facilitates older persons to participate in the society and enjoy their rights, freedoms, and live in dignity. And older members of the society bill is also being finalized. All this, moderator, is in addition to the retirement benefit schemes that are mandatory for all employers. And these benefit schemes are assessed upon retirement age or upon attainment of the 55 years of age. To better serve the older persons, more resources are actually required to fund the desired programs, and our government is continuing on with mobilizing more resources for this noble cause. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate for her remarks and again for sharing with us the practical measures that you are taking forward, both in planning and programming, and most importantly, as you said now, resources for this noble cause. Thank you. I now call upon the distinguished delegate of Finland.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Moderator, thank you for giving us the floor. Finland is aging rapidly. One of the measures we are currently developing is to enhance the opportunities for independent living. It is vital to include older people, their families, and professionals to that process. We all share the understanding that social and health services are only one piece of the puzzle. For example, we need partnerships with the NGOs and the other stakeholders to ensure social interaction amongst the older people. We should also bear in mind that people over 65 offer a great potential and resource for the whole society. In addition, we find it necessary to innovate new technological tools to support both the professionals and older people themselves. In this regard, we would like to ask the panel how the already existing and emerging technological innovations could be disseminated and upscaled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate. And I note your particular question and suggestion, which I think the panel may wish to respond to directly later on. Thank you. I now call on the distinguished delegate of Namibia.
Thank you very much, Chair, or Moderator. Namibia has a 7% old age that constitutes the total population. And our income inequalities are quite high. The Gini coefficient currently stands at 0.58. And we have got this difficulty that we want to bring to this table, since we read and could not find any in the documents that were prepared. It's the issue of the finances of old age people. There are two dimensions that I want to address. One is the finances of old age people as it relates to family members who perpetually robbed, for the lack of a better word, robbed old age people of their lifelong savings. And then the second aspect is when older people gets to the stage of feebleness, you have got the so-called expert investment advisors and insurance advisors that approach them with all sorts of wise investments that will double income and so on, and eventually they are at risk of losing their life savings at the end of the day. How best can one address this issue? And if there are already some examples that one could emulate, could it be shared with us at this platform, and could this part also be made part of the whole discussion at the end of the day? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Namibia. A clear question here, which I think the panel may wish to come back to. It's a question of how to protect older people from unscrupulous behaviour in the financial department when they are least able to cope with it. And it's probably a worldwide issue, and it would be good to look at that later on. I now call on the distinguished representative of Austria to share remarks.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. I would like to thank the panelists for their report about important achievements and remaining gaps in the implementation of MIPA and its regional implementation strategies. But at the same time, it was stated that we are facing immense new challenges. In a world of digitalization and technological revolution, as well as in combining MIPA with the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and in ensuring the rights of older persons. So, therefore, I would like to ask the panelists if there are any considerations or plans to hold a third Global Assembly on Aging, 40 years after the first World Assembly on Aging in Vienna in 1982, and 20 years after Madrid in the year 2022. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Austria for her very clear proposal and question, which is whether there should be a third Global Assembly in 2022. Thank you. We'll come back to that. May I call, please, on the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and I would like also to thank the panelists for their insightful speeches. The Islamic Republic of Iran attaches great importance to the promotion and protection of the rights of older persons. Iran is among the few countries in the region that has completed its demographic transition. In light of its major achievements in public health as well as in education, fertility and mortality rates have sharply declined and population growth has slowed down. The current demographic transition caused a large increase in population and middle age and the elderly, leading the country into rapid population aging. The proportion of old population 60 years old and above has increased from 1.6 in 1966 to 9.2% in 2015 and projected to reach near 30% in 2050. A multi-sectoral approach involving different ministries and planning organizations is the key to success of a comprehensive policy. Along with the Iran's 6 5-year development plan, where the establishment of a designated committee for the elderly is envisaged, a national document on aging has been drafted through an interministerial joint consultation process. I would also like to inform that the Islamic Republic of Iran, in cooperation with UNFPA office in Tehran and the Help International Age, will be hosting a regional conference on aging in late 2018. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, and for the sharing of the information about the meeting to take place. We look forward to hearing more. Thank you. May I call now on the distinguished representative of Spain?
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Spain's commitment with regard to aging is one of the priorities of the international action of the government of Spain. This committee started in 2002 at the Assembly of Aging, continues today. Spain is deeply committed to the action which the Economic Commission for Europe of the United Nations is conducting on aging, commitment which has been implemented in the holding in 2007, the second conference on aging, and in 2008 on the subject of Egypt, and we have participated in this since then. We thank Portugal for the ministerial meeting in Lisbon, as well as chairing the group. I would like to add what the Minister of Portugal has said on the work done by the members for older people. Spain, as a member of the Ibero-American Committee, has cooperated with its Ibero-American members in the International Network for Technical Cooperation, which has established its programs of cooperation not only for older persons, but also people with disabilities. In September 2017 in Santiago, Chile, the second conference of the Intergovernmental Network was held, as well as the 35th Executive Committee. We hope to hold the 36th meeting of our Executive Committee in Mexico City, and by 2019 there will be the holding of the 13th meeting in Buenos Aires. This cooperation has taken place within the Ibero-America. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Spain and thank for the information about the meeting coming up. We appreciate it. Thank you. I now call on the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I thank the panelists for their statements, which have been very important. And in particular, I would like to thank Mr. Lazarus from South Africa. I think there were 55 million older persons there. The Dominican Republic has consolidated a society with equal rights, particularly guaranteeing the rights of health for our older person. We build this constantly, and we are trying to build a future, a better future for older persons. We belong to the Commission of, and we are respecting the SDGs. In our countries, older persons are associated, are very involved in health. Our president issued a decree in 2015 where the National Council for Homes deals with the health for older persons with special care and giving them active, participatory, and protected work. In the area of justice, our country has established a unit against violence to older persons. And I'd like to add a parenthesis here with the sister country, which said that nothing on the older persons cannot have their assets pillaged. And this is happening throughout the world. We have vast experience of this. The Attorney General is working daily to confront this problem, and we can support people have had their assets pillaged, and we are prosecuting young people who have stolen from their family, and we look into the bank resources, and we have resolved 3,000 cases. Of these cases, we have prosecuted 26 cases, and one was sentenced to 5 years. So the Dominican Republic would support any country which is dealing with this problem and provide them assistance. In the area of productive work, we have a program for pensioners. This is a program so that the pensioners who have spent all their work all their life working and then they retire, but they continue to produce productive work for older persons, takes into account well-being and their health. But they can continue to participate because we want an equitable society for everyone. We have a program of Hours Without Barriers, and those who have worked in the informal sector, we give them compensatory funds. We work. A happy old age is built from youth, and there's intergenerational programs because our young people can participate, depending on their professions, can participate with the old persons, teachers, and doctors. Therefore, can receive knowledge from the older persons. We also, at the Ministry for Women, we have a program, Always Women, called Always Women. We promote older women persons. They can be more participatory in their homes. In the Caribbean, when a woman has given birth, they sometimes feel isolated, and they do not always receive help from their spouse. And we have achieved great results in this respect. In our centers, all of our older persons know how to write and read. We are eradicating illiteracy, and 80 or 90% of older persons know how to read and write. And many of them go on to lifelong courses. Many of them know how to use computers, and therefore I think we are making progress. And we know what the problems are and the difficulties that exist. But I'd like to point out that in the report of the Madrid plan, the Madrid plan is important. It's an important tool. It's been decisive in implementing policies and laws for our older persons. I'm saying that for our country. But we do need a stronger instrument, an international convention for older persons. Furthermore, to conclude, I'd like to point out that the demographic growth is such that the 63, 68 is the life expectancy, and we see this as being a human victory. So I congratulate the panelists and all of the countries who have said that we're going ahead and we know how to find solutions to the problems and the demographic growth we have experienced. And that really is a human victory. I thank you.
Many thanks, distinguished delegate. Longevity is a human victory. I think we will take that away. Thank you. I now call on the distinguished representative of Japan. Please note we have a number of, we have a few more speakers from civil society, and it would be much appreciated if the comments can allow civil society to come in later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator and the panelists. I would like to ask questions about retirement. And some of the panelists pointed out that retirement is not an option, and we need to make retirement less attractive. And Japanese government think that it is important to realize a society where everyone can shine, everyone can enjoy life, including older person, not give up. But I personally have worries and concerns. So my first question is, what is the incentive for companies to hire elderly people? Because one of the panelists said there's a tax incentive. So I would like to hear more about that, and not only tax incentive, but also other measures or comments on thoughts. And the second question is that how to make retirement less attractive, because some people have to retire because they need to care their parents at home, and not everyone is afford to pay for the care services. And if you retire, you can get the retirement allowance for care, and also you can get the time to care their parents. So how to make retirement less attractive? That is my question. Thank you.
Many thanks. We'll come to the questions at the end. Distinguished Delegate, thank you. I now call on the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Thank you, and my thanks to the distinguished panelists for their interventions. The situation of older persons and the protection of their human rights remains high on the agenda of the European Union and its member states. Most EU member states are experiencing significant population ageing, and the EU is keenly aware of the difficulties faced by older persons and of the need to do more to ensure that they enjoy their human rights. Older persons are not a homogeneous group, but are diverse in their needs, preferences, and opportunities. The challenges they face in the enjoyment of their human rights vary greatly. 2017 was an important year for gauging progress made in the implementation of the Madrid Plan of Action. In September, in Lisbon, the EU and its member states participated actively in the 4th Ministerial Conference on Aging, which completed the 3rd review and appraisal cycle of MIPA. As we have heard, the focus of the conference was on realising the potential of living longer, and we welcome the Lisbon Ministerial Declaration, which sets out policy goals for the 4th cycle of action around 3 main thematic areas: recognising the potential of older persons, encouraging longer working life and ability to work, and ensuring ageing with dignity. We are pleased that all these goals give due attention to protecting older persons' enjoyment of all human rights and dignity, promoting their autonomy, self-determination, and participation in society. This further includes supporting the necessary infrastructure and assistance to prevent all types of abuse and violence against older persons, and ensuring their economic, physical, and psychological safety. The recently adopted European Pillar of Social Rights sets the framework to meet the challenges of an ageing Europe in a fast-paced world by highlighting the rights to quality and inclusive education, training, and lifelong learning. The Pillar of Social Rights also contains principles concerning equal opportunities, old age income and pensions, and the inclusion of persons with disabilities. In addition to better using the potential of MIPA, the EU would like to recall that the whole spectrum of internationally recognised human rights standards and principles also covers and protects older persons without discrimination. We are thus calling for more visibility and the increased use of these existing international human rights standards, both international covenants on civil and political rights and on economic, social and cultural rights, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, as well as other instruments which already address many relevant issues in the areas of health, social security, violence and discrimination. In this context, we also need to focus on the steps that can be taken to strengthen the protection of human rights for older persons. In order to better use the potential of MIPA and the whole spectrum of existing internationally recognised human rights standards and principles, it is of importance to continue their implementation at national, regional and international level, and to identify, exchange and promote best practices relating to the promotion and protection of these rights, including in the scope of the open-ended Working Group on Ageing. Thank you.
Many thanks. That was an extremely helpful survey and will be taken on board, I'm sure. Thank you very much, distinguished delegate of the European Union. I now turn to civil society, who have been waiting patiently, I think, and I would like to ask the distinguished delegate of the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, which is chair number 2751, to make their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My question is about the probability of the next, the third United Nations World Assembly on Aging. In 2002, the UN Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, said population aging is one of the three most important crises faced by human society, like climate change and poverty. At the following second UN World Assembly on Aging, held the same year in 2002 in Madrid, Spain, the United Nations adopted and proclaimed the political declaration of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, MIFA, as the primary guideline for member states to address the phenomenon of population aging. In the UN Secretary General's current report on the third review and appraisal of MIFA regarding the last 15 years implementation of MIFA from 2002 to 2017, the achievement of MIFA appeared to be far from satisfactory and demand further action to respond to the challenges of rapid population aging all over the world. As immediate past president of International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, IAGG, I believe the United Nations must prepare for the next and the third United Nations World Assembly on Aging, which would be probably projected to be held in 2022, following the 20 years intervals from 1982 First World Assembly on Aging in Vienna to the 2002 Second World Assembly on Aging in Madrid, in order to proclaim a new international plan of action on aging issues. We need new concept for a global agenda to embrace the phenomenon of aging across life course in 21st century, to integrate older persons into contemporary dynamic aging societies, and to confront the new needs of older persons in our aging societies, such as healthy and active aging, older people's workforce, continuing life education for persons as they approach their second careers, social participation of older persons, prevention of non-communicable diseases, including the dementias, dignity at the end of life.
I'm sorry, distinguished delegate. We're running out of time. May I ask you to, then we won't be able to hear the other NGOs and the panelists. May I ask you to come to the end? Thank you.
Okay, distinguished panelists, could you please comment on the probability of the convening the prospective third UN World Assembly on Aging, if it appears possible? Who could introduce the resolution for the World Assembly, and when and where would you suggest the World Assembly on Aging to be held? Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate. May I call now on the HelpAge distinguished delegate from HelpAge International, 2752, and please to keep the remarks short so that we can hear the panelists respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Speaking on behalf of HelpAge International, I come from Tanzania. I would like to ask the panelists on how we could implement SDGs together with MIPUR to connect all these two and be responsible bodies for at national levels, and what can be done by the governments, member countries, member states, to make this connection, and how we could, at the UN system, support the governments to integrate MIPUR and SDGs. Secondly, one of the key provisions of MIPUR and income security, while SDGs include as a comment to social protection for all, and how we could make sure that universal social pension are a reality for all of the people everywhere worldwide. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate very much. I have time for very clear questions. In order for the panel to respond, I think we have there's room for one more short question from civil society. I have two listed, INPEA and ILC. Please, can you decide which one will speak? 2755 or 2753. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am representing INPEA. My organization name is Gravis, and I am working in Thar Desert rural areas. And the Thar rural areas, women has many restrictions. She has to practice parda, or you can veil from woman to woman, and they have culturally no property right. And also they are not allowed to go alone outside. For that, my question is how we can make sure that older women of rural areas are not left behind. How much focus is in MPA planning and to raise their rights and to secure their rights. Examples, and also women number is larger in whole world. Among Rajasthan also, 53% are women and 47% are men. And rural women culturally has no right on property.
Thank you. Many thanks indeed for your question and remarks. Now I'm going to, we haven't much time, I'm going to turn this over to the panelists to respond. There are a number of questions which I include means of implementation, how to integrate MIPUR in the SDGs, the link between rights and development, whether or not there should be another World Assembly, and how that will happen, the probability of, and this very important question about retirement and financial safeguarding of older persons are among the questions. So I would like to begin to ask my distinguished panelists to respond, and I will start with His Excellency Hector Cardenas to see if he would like to say a few words. Thank you.
Okay, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Just a few words about the questions. In the debate, the question prevailed about the Third World Conference, and I think that the role that we have to play is to keep the subject of aging high on the public agenda. This meeting will therefore be very important to continue to make progress with this subject. In relation to the subject of aging, various sectors have spoken. I'm sorry, that various people have said we should include the subject, which is, and we should have an intersectorial approach, which should be cross-cutting, and we must ensure that the subject is present in various sectors like health, employment, housing, etc. And this also leads to analysis of the legal multilateral specific framework which is needed, and it must be binding for our countries. In some countries in Latin America have already made progress in adopting this, and in some countries, including my country, we have continued to make progress in this respect. And finally, I'd like to say that the only way to make progress is by strengthening the institutions in all our countries. And strengthening the institutions, we must also take into account human resources, which are fundamental to advance in a relevant way. Thank you.
Many thanks, distinguished Minister. May I now turn to His Excellency José Antonio Vieira da Silva for concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. Only a few words. If we listen carefully, almost every delegation talk about something like in a few years are going to double the figures of the people with more than 60 or 65. The difference between us, between the different member states, is that for some countries, that double will be from 4 to 8, in other countries from 15 to 30% as a share of the population. So we are now dealing a problem with policies and with options that are built for this framework we are facing today. 20 years from now, we are going to face a very different framework, a very different society, with different choices, with different dynamics. So we must prepare that change. And preparing that change, in my opinion, means that we combine the social policies for the elderly with a preventive approach for the old workers. The people that are going to be a part of a double share of older people are now between us. They are the older workers. They are in the final stage of his working life in many countries. So we must work to prepare all these people to make a more easy transition from work to pensions or to the situation after work. And that includes one question that the representative of Japan placed. When we talk, and we have approved it in the European meeting of ministers, that our policies must make less attractive early retirement, not retirement. Let's address early retirement, because the retirement, the social protection of old age, the allowances for old age, is a common ambition of all our societies. Unfortunately, it's not yet right that we have in all our societies. But something different is to allow that people, for instance, with 50 years in some economies, is invited to be a pensioner and not a worker. And short-term views of some companies make it real during the last 20 years. And we cannot maintain that kind of option. Consider that a man or a woman with 50 years or 55 years is not able, has not the right of work. I think we must change that. It's the only way to maintain sustainable our social protection systems. How do we could that with different tools in our designing our pension systems, our fiscal policy, our labor policy? It's possible to fight against this problem, the problem of them encourage older people to go out of the labor market. Finally, I want to say that many of the problems, I don't have time enough to talk about all the questions that are in the table. I think that many of the problems that some delegations place could be handled with a larger partnership between the public policies and the civil society. When we are facing, for instance, about financial insecurity or social care, it's, I think, a good option to work with the civil society, with the organizations of the older people, to build the answers we all need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We have 4 minutes left, so I would like to turn to the to Honourable Chowdhury, Speaker of Bangladesh. Please limit your remarks to 1 minute if you can, so that we can hear everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. I'll be very brief. I just want to respond to one of the queries in relation to how the companies can be persuaded through tax incentives and other modes to employ or re-employ older people. As we have heard this morning, the extensive discussion, one important point which has come across is, of course, providing economic security to the older people. And very closely linked is the employment opportunity and the right to work when we are discussing about ensuring economic security. Because economic security, on the one hand, we are trying to cover to a great extent by providing social protection and all the other measures. But I think it needs also that how we can ensure employment opportunities and particularly re-employment opportunities for older people, that is very critical. So enhancing income generating opportunities for older persons, promoting decent work and re-employment opportunities, and flexible and appropriate employment by public and private employers. And if we connect this, then it brings us to the issue of how we can persuade the companies or the employers. It can be done through various financial incentives which can be used, including subsidies and financial grants to the employers who recruit, retain and re-employ older workers. And tax incentives can also be introduced for the companies who are retaining, re-employing, and recruiting older workers. So different models and modes can be used to promote this segment, which will eventually contribute to the economic security. And we have this in practice in the Asia-Pacific region. One of the country representatives actually made submission that there is governments providing incentives to employers that engage older persons. So it is not only in theory, but some of the countries have already adopted policies along these lines. Thank you.
Many thanks. Speaker Chowdhury. May I turn now to His Excellency Kampabwe for final remarks. Very brief, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Very quickly, the question on the possibility of holding a third international conference. I would think it is desirable, and I would suggest that that could come as an outcome of this session. And so if it is an outcome of this 56 CSD, then it will be taken up in the normal UN structures in terms of advertising, who is to be interested in hosting and things relating thereto. Secondly, the question from Namibia. Unfortunately, there may not be a ready answer. There are different forms of exploitation of the vulnerable in different countries. And what is legal is not, everything that is legal is not right necessarily. And so it is up to the national states to try and have policies, for instance, under legislation dealing with financial practices, or legislation of certain, or rather the bylaws of certain organizations, the corporates and professional organizations, for instance, if there are specific acts by, let us say, financial advisors who are taking advantage of the vulnerable, then under the professional associations, certain codes of conduct can be strengthened and national laws strengthened that can prosecute or at least limit the kind of abuse that the old people are being subjected to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And finally, and not least, I turn to Dr. Abla Sibai for her concluding remarks.
Yes, I will be very brief. Thank you. So MIPA has been a very powerful tool to promote and instigate governments to make progress towards achieving steps forward in the aging agenda. Yet, as we have heard from you, honorable participants, there are worldwide developments that call for an update on the MIPA that would take into consideration all these issues which have been highlighted, for example, the technological advances, the digital illiteracy, the financial advices, and others. So I do second the suggestions made by some of you and made by the panelists over here that a new World Assembly would also be a meeting, an opportunity to align between the MIPA and the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody for their wonderful participation, this great panel, and I hand over to the chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beals. And dear delegates, we've come to the end of this extremely interesting morning. The high level of interest is illustrated by the fact that we're pushing the boundaries of the time frame we have on this important topic on the third review and appraisal of MIPA. I'd first of all like to thank very much our moderator, Ms. Beals, for very, very skillful guiding us through the discussion, and of course our very distinguished panelists as well as delegates from the floor. Clearly this is an issue which we will need to continue to focus on. We need to discuss how best to respond to these challenges, how to maintain and ensure prosperity at national level, as well as respecting and ensuring the human rights and dignity of older persons. We will make sure that this discussion is part of our contribution, this Commission's contribution to the HLPF and to our discussion on the implementation of Agenda 2030 going forward. So many thanks. If I could just keep your attention for a couple of more seconds, just to remind you that this afternoon at 3 p.m. the Commission will hold a panel discussion on disability under the theme Towards Inclusive, Resilient and Sustainable Development, an evidence-based approach to the mainstreaming of disability in the implementation, monitoring and evaluation of the Agenda 2030. I thank you again for your participation. That meeting is adjourned.